any training program that you're doing. You can assess maybe a program that you've got from a trainer, an online coach, whoever, and you can determine whether that program is doing the right things or prioritizing the right principles. As we go along, we're going to start with basic definitions. So if you've ever done a PE degree or sports science at any level, you will have heard some of these terms. You don't have to develop a deep understanding, but at least being introduced to them will equip you with even a way of talking about training. With a little bit of my coaching history, I've coached on multiple New Zealand teams. I've had a Commonwealth Games athlete. I've had an athlete go to the Tokyo Olympics and I went with her. Probably the most controversial athlete in the world, Laurel Hubbard. I've seen sort of a strength sport all the way from the grassroots to the top level. I've trained hundreds and hundreds of people, introduced them personally to the sport of weightlifting. I started off as a powerlifter, and even before that I sort of just started strength training because I watched Dragon Ball Z as a kid. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. I have no formal qualifications in sport, but I basically tumbled down a rabbit hole over the last 15, 16 years, teaching myself, being mentored by other coaches, and yeah, tumbled all the way down the rabbit hole as far as you can go when it comes to strength sports. To structure our training in a way that we're going towards our goals, and we're not just spinning our wheels, training hard all the time. We're hitting particular blocks of training when we should be in order to get the adaptation we want from training. So what periodization allows us to do is we can change our training variables over time. Broadly, it's going to be how hard you train, which is intensity, and how much you train, which is volume. And that desired effect could be constrained by time. So for example, if you have a powerlifting competition in 12 weeks, periodization allows you to plan towards that so that you're ready to be at your best on that day. Okay? If you just kind of train hard all the way up and you don't, say, deload or taper at the right time, that could impact your results. Periodization is just this planning of training, and it doesn't have to be crazy rigid. It can be a loose plan, and it can be changeable week to week. It can be changeable day to day. And the basic idea of periodization is how do we get better at stuff over time, and it gives us a structure to change those goals as we want to. So the next term I'm going to talk about is the biggest planning view of training, which is called a macrocycle. So a macrocycle is the entire period leading up to a competition. So this is our biggest structure. So let's say we start off in January and our biggest competition of the year is in August. Our macrocycle is that entire period. You can use each of these blocks to emphasize particular qualities. So for example, as Olympic weightlifters, at the beginning of our macrocycle, our main goals are to increase our muscle mass and to work on our technique. It doesn't just have to be distinct in this like hypertrophy, strength, peaking. It can just be that this block, right, you might have been training for 4 or 5 years, but this block I'm really going to work on my back squat, okay? Or I'm going to work on my upper body, and I'm going to drop my other exercises back to maintenance, which allows me to really target and have enough recovery to push what I really want to push. Okay? So mesocycles are 2 to 12 weeks. I would say a 2-week mesocycle is very, very short. 12-week cycle is very, very long. So for the majority of people, depending on your goal, it's going to be somewhere in the middle. So for example, at Otago Weightlifting, for a weightlifter, our sort of standard training block is about 5 weeks. Because weightlifting can be very intense, can be hard on the joints, can be hard, very hard mentally, a 5 or 4 week block is quite common in the weightlifting world. It can be longer, but maybe that would be our hypertrophy or muscle building phase would be a little bit longer. And our peaking phase, our most intense cycle of training right before a competition, that might be our shortest mesocycle. Referring to what type of week you're in. So broadly, there's two types of weeks. One is accumulation. So that's our regular training where we're overloading our exercises from week to week. So that's our general training, and then a deloading phase, which, again, these microcycles can be any length. Your deload period, depending on what you're doing, might be 3 days, okay? So we have accumulation and deloading. You might have heard people talk about a competition taper before, like a big event, like where you might keep your intensity higher than you would in a regular deload, but your volume's still very low. Your volume might be cut in half. You want to take 10% off the average intensity of your second heaviest week, and then you want to cut the volume in half, so 50% of the volume. So let's say you normally do 4 sets of 10 for an exercise, you might do 2 sets of 10 during the deload. So we start at this 90% of the average intensity of your second highest week, and then throughout the week we can drop that intensity down as we go, and then on your final day of deload, say on a Wednesday, it might be 80% intensity of the second heaviest week, and then on Friday you might do a very, very light day, 50%, and then start your training block again on the Monday. So there's some sort of general recommendations for hypertrophy and strength training. Your training must reflect going towards that goal. So if you want to be at the Olympics as a weightlifter, you maybe don't want to train for underwater basket weaving 5 times per week. Do you see what I'm saying? That's an extreme example, but people do it all the time. Their goal might be in 5 weeks they might have a weightlifting competition, but they're running every day. That running training is almost completely non-specific for lifting a maximum snatch and clean. Yeah, I'll pick on running again, but people who run every single day, but their goal is to have the strongest legs in the universe, that running is so low intensity, they're not going to get that adaptation towards their goals. The person who does RPE 3 squats accidentally when they're pushing towards a powerlifting meet. So the overload must be enough to elicit adaptation, and that zone in that RPE I was talking about is RPE 6 to 10. Okay, training within that range is going to allow you to overload. Next one is fatigue management. So fatigue management can take place in a lot of different ways. So acute fatigue management is our rest between sets. Is our rest between sets appropriate? Driving us towards our goals. Are all of my days heavy days in a week? Or would I benefit from undulating my training, having a light day? Outside of the gym, am I managing my fatigue? Am I managing my stress? Am I eating well? All of these things must take place. So again, there's a hierarchy to this, from the most important to least important, but it's all important. It's just what is going to drive us towards our goals. The next aspect is stimulus recovery adaptation. So we know that muscles take a certain amount of time to recover fully. So we know that that's going to take place around 72 hours if we're training a muscle hard. If you have a really hard quad day on a Monday, probably not doing things well if you have a really hard quad day on the Tuesday, if you see what I'm saying. So variation is important in terms of the psychology of getting better at sports and getting better at lifting. So rotating exercises is important psychologically. There can be you can experience burnout, but you can also experience adaptive decay. So if you do the same variation of squats for 3 years, and let's just say you back squat 3 times a week for 3 years, and you've already been training for 5 or 6 years, you could benefit from switching those exercises and getting a different adaptation, different angle on the joint or the muscle that could benefit your training, because your adaptation will decay over time. That doesn't mean you can't cycle back to what you were doing, but variation can lead you to changing those exercises every 3 months, 4 months. Okay? Any questions so far? No? Phase potentiation, so this is getting really deep into the nitty-gritty. So phase potentiation is the ordering of training, the ordering of the training blocks being important towards your goal. So a good example is someone like a shot putter. So generally what they do is they do like a maximal strength block where they're driving their 1RM squats, bench presses, that sort of thing up. And then they switch to a competition phase or like a peaking or power block where they're doing really fast explosive things, maybe more specificity in throwing the implement, and ordering it in that way, going from maximal strength to power can get them the adaptation they want. Okay? And then finally, individual differences. Okay? So this is people who have, so an individual difference that might be relevant is some people simply adapt to more volume better than others. So there might be someone who adapts really well to 9 sets, and there might be someone else who would improve at a faster rate if they were doing 15 sets. Okay? And sometimes these individual differences, we can talk about them broadly. So for example, someone who has, say, shorter femurs in relation to their torso, they're probably going to love squatting, and they're probably going to be really, really good at it. Okay? Someone with longer femurs and a shorter torso, they could still be a great squatter, but it might have a bigger impact on their body because they're going to have to lean over more and their quads won't be targeted as hard, if you see what I'm saying. And we can probably think of other differences here. Bench presser, someone with shorter arms is going to love the bench press and might be able to grow their chest and arms really easily. Someone with longer arms might struggle on the bench press. So the program might reflect those differences. Let me give you an example for someone with longer femurs who needs to lean over more when they squat. They might, instead of back squatting 3 times a week, they might choose an exercise where their leverages are less impacted, but they can really target their legs. So, you know, they might, instead of back squatting 3 times a week, on the Wednesday, they might focus on leg press, or they might focus on split squats. And that takes away that leverage component where they can really target the joints and muscle groups that they want to. That's just an example. Any questions so far? No? Cool.